Welcome to the world's most livable city, as we like to say and brag about. Yes, it is a very cold morning here. It was also the host city for EcoCity World Summit last year, and we're very proud of Melbourne because it has won awards for its urban forest program and so on. So it is something that we love talking about in Melbourne. But before we start talking more about sustainability, for those interstate, there were a few years ago when there was a new policy announced called the Sustainable Government Program. And I remember thinking, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's look in and find out more about that. And it turned out that it was about cuts to the public service. So I thought, well, let's start off, Monica, by asking the expert, what do we mean by the word sustainability? Tell us what it means to you, particularly in the context of nature sustainability.
Thank you, Tanya. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So, that's a very good question, and has been asked quite a few times. There is an issue with this word because it's been used and overused for decades, and it still feels vague and not clear what that means. So I can try and give you an idea through the lens of the journal, which is, a part of the thinking, the vision behind this project. Which has been a very ambitious project since the beginning. The idea is to try and look at things no longer in an isolated way. So we live in a system, we're part of that system. The system is made of connected things, and we have to learn to understand those connections. We have to learn to understand that if we act in a way, we have some knock-on effects somewhere else. It might be far away from us, and on things that we don't think could be affected by our behavior and the way we operate and we use the natural resources. So it's really very much focusing on the connection between the human world and the natural world, but in this interconnected way. So it's the part of this bigger system. Yes, so sustainability for many is a science and for others is a goal. So that's the other thing. I think there is a lot to do with the science, and that's why we launched the journal, because we want to publish the best science in that space. But it is true that it's also a moral issue, right? It's trying to make sure that, we use resources in a way that is not hampering the well-being of future generations. So it's also a dynamic concept that has kind of a temporal dimension. So that makes the journal a little bit challenging because we do receive contributions that are purely scientific and a lot of contributions that are a little bit more advocacy type. And we're trying to navigate that space the best we can.
Because I guess that's kind of challenging because, say, for example, in climate change publishing, nature climate change, you're saying phenomenon, the physical phenomenon, we do this, it has this effect.
Yeah.
And, you're coming from an objectivist point of view, that the world is knowable and it applies to, it follows certain rules. But then when you're bringing in the human world, it starts to get messy.
Yeah.
Was that comfortable, uncomfortable? Is that a new thing for Springer Nature to be going into these fields?
So it is. It is, not uncomfortable, but it is challenging, I'd say. We started this kind of journey to delve with research that has direct implication for society, that has more of a solution orientation, that is more of a policy relevance, like in 2011 when we launched the Nature Climate Change, which is the first journal I worked for. And it was the first interdisciplinary journal to include the social sciences and the policy relevance. But as you say, it was still very much rooted in the kind of the physics of the climate system. So it was an incredibly successful experiment to try and bring the other sciences in, but it was a little bit safer than going square into the messy kind of world, because there was a clear kind of chunk of science to publish in there, which is the science of the physical climate system and the science of the impacts.
So tell me a little bit about your background. So you're a social scientist originally,
yeah,
is that right?
So I was the first non-science editor at Nature. That's worth saying.
How was that received? You know,
it was good, and I was very well received. But I have to say, I felt intimidated when I started, and so I had a long journey to understand the science world and the publishing in science, but. Yeah, it was mutual. They also had to learn about the social sciences and economics, and that was a journey on the company side as well, which I think they embarked on very well. And now we have a group of editors in the social sciences, so it's no longer just one. So that is working well, and we're building on it. Mm-hmm. But going back to the messy space that you mentioned, so on the back of the success of Nature Climate Change, there was a lot of strategy thinking before launching this journal, Nature Sustainability. There was a lot of strategy thinking because we knew that we could do more. We knew that we could tackle in a better way interdisciplinary research where, the social sciences are no longer an add-on, but they're kind of part of the design of the research, and the more applied space, looking at solutions to these problematic issues where, at the interface human-natural. So there were a lot of unanswered questions from a publishing point of view for Nature. So I was involved in doing this strategy thinking for a year and a half before we launched the journal. And the proposal was very well received. They were all conscious of the challenges. Mm-hmm. So it was very much backed editorially. There was a strong editorial support. This is a project that we're trying to make it successful as we do with all the journals, but we want to put the heart into it because we know it's the right thing to do. And then it was slightly different from launching any other journal in the company. So I'm really excited about this success, the support that I received, and now the opportunity to leading the journal.
Because that's quite interesting, because I think we often see, like Nature Group, Springer Nature, mm-hmm. a large publisher, mm-hmm. as an entity of the mind, as this cool, objective organisation that doesn't necessarily have a heart or soul. But now it sounds like there is that, it's an organisation that wanted to make a contribution, could see a need. Tell us a bit about that, and also about how much of this was rooted in things, for example, like the discussion of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Did you see a need and step in? Was it driven or called for by other people?
I guess, yes, the contingent situation helped a lot because obviously over the years since we launched the first interdisciplinary journal, it felt like there was a stronger demand from the side of policymakers, these big multilateral organizations, to have science that can be informing decision making. And so we, as a publisher, didn't want to kind of lag behind. That's definitely part of what happened. But I also have to say that the editor-in-chief, the former editor-in-chief at Nature, Phil Campbell, was always very much interested into this interface between, basic science and science that can more directly tackle societal problems. In fact, it was his idea to have this strategy thinking behind sustainability, and he got the support from the higher up to have an editor working on that. So there is a combination of factors: the long-lasting interest, and the confluence of the momentum. So it felt like he could get a lot more traction, like at the point of the SDG discussion in 2015, and all the progress made by the IPCC on climate change. The public debate about these issues has kind of grown a lot. And so there was a window of opportunity.
Do you think it's also the right time? I mean, is it also things like we're seeing at a lot of universities, they're starting to break down the silos, and you can leave one faculty and collaborate with someone at a different one, but also at a time when so much of research is being digitised, people can go online, they can share it in different ways. Incidentally, for those of you who have phones, if you put them on silent, but you can use them for Twitter, and we do have a hashtag today. So we've got Sustain in Oz or hashtag NatureSustInOz if you want to use hashtags. And of course, there's at NatureSustainer. And we're here at MSSI Melb. But how important has that? Well, it's a digital journal. How valuable has that sharing enabled by the internet and connectedness helped?
Yeah, that has helped a lot because in many ways, I mean, being online, being an electronic journal has relaxed some of the constraints on, even the length of articles that go in print journals. And Nature is famous for having these short formats. And with the electronic versions of the journals now, it's possible to relax a little bit those legacy constraints on the word counts, and that has helped. And has helped especially the interdisciplinary science that we want to so much publish, because obviously that requires inevitably a little bit more space. And yes, going back to your point about now university seems to be breaking the silos. Yes, there have been a lot of attempts in the past to do, but they were isolated, and some failed, and some succeeded. But there has always been this kind of desire to tackle this societal problem in the best way, and the best way, because we need to look at those interactions, is interdisciplinary, or occasionally even transdisciplinary. And that's necessary, but it's kind of not reflected by the kind of institutional background and structure of universities, where you still have departments and everyone is trying to get their foot into the discipline by publishing in disciplinary journals, and that has created a lot of barriers over time. But it seems like there is a strong recognition now that doesn't work for the kind of research we are talking about here today. And the funding agency seems to be responding by calling for more collaboration across disciplines and interdisciplinary proposals. So there are a number of things that are kind of evolving kind of fast now. I'm sure that there are a lot of researchers that have been frustrated for a long time, but maybe the younger generation will find a more fruitful and more supportive environment now to try and do interdisciplinary work. And so, so there is confluence of things.
Do you think that part of that is seeing a logical home for the kind of research that they want to do, the ability to read about it in a particular journal? And
that was part of our thinking. So we knew that there was a gap. We understood that there was a gap of this kind. So
tell us a bit about that. So how, because I think a lot of people would probably be a bit confused of, particularly since you were senior editor at Nature Climate Change, now you're at Nature Sustainability. What would go in Nature Climate Change and what would go in Nature Sustainability? Why was there need for a new journal?
Yeah, because, well, obviously we do have an area of overlap in between the two journals, because climate change is part of sustainability. But as we said in the beginning, climate change is many things, but is essentially, at the start, is a physical phenomenon. And sustainability is more about how we handle, and how we manage our natural resources. So the overlap is kind of evident, but what we're trying to do in nature sustainability is looking at things through slightly different lens. And even climate change for us is important, but not in isolation. It's not an isolated issue. So we cannot tackle climate change without looking at how the mitigation solution we put in place might affect other issues, like biodiversity, for example. And that was one thing that went into the the thinking. The other thing that went into the thinking of the need for another journal is that for sustainability we need to look also at the solution space. And in the solution space we have policy solutions, we have institutional change, but we also have technology. And that's something that was not on part of the scope of nature climate change. So we do stretch from the natural science, the social science aspects of sustainability into the technology and engineering solutions. So we're trying to give a holistic, that's another overused word, kind of opportunity to different fields to look at sustainability from all those angles in one place. And that should help, because obviously you can't keep track of the literature in so many different fields of research. And so if you know that there is a place where you can find the best examples in all of those fields and subfields, that could help cross-fertilize ideas as well as collaborations. There seems to be a need to integrate more engineering in the thinking for sustainability. But on the other side, we're also open to the humanities. And so there is also a need to integrate more deep thinking about how we want to kind of define the future for our children, right? And so, so we're open to philosophy and history as well. So it's challenging.
Do you think that's been, I mean, in the global discourse, particularly in Western cultures, do you think there's been too much of this thinking that science will save us, let's fund more scientific research, when it's, human systems, culture, values, these sorts of things that are important as well? It's
an interesting question. We do need science. That's something that, there is no question about the need for science. It's just yes, so to understand how we can change society, it's not enough. That's where I come from. I don't think that science should be underestimated in any way. We do need it. It's the way we progress. But there is need of something else to try and translate, but also to try and bridge those gaps, because a lot is about a different kind of science. It's about understanding how people behave. It's understanding why we do the things we do. It's understanding of how we could do them differently to be more in harmony with the natural world. Also to reconcile with the natural world, because a lot of what we've been doing over decades has kind of separated us. And so we still think that we can just use things and that's it. And that's not the case. We know that we're an integral part of that natural world. So yeah, so we do need science, but we do need a bit more than just the basic science. And I think the publisher has recognized that. So Nature will always be known for being the home of basic science, and that will never change. But they want also to be recognized as the home for science that matters to society.
And that, looking at that science that matters to society, what's sort of been the reaction? Do you get any sense of interest from, I mean, one of the things we're going to be talking about today is bringing evidence to policymakers and seeing the research translated into programs, into action that makes a difference. What are you seeing, particularly in the first few months of publication? What's gaining traction? Are there things that are getting attention of policymakers, or also business sector practitioners, people outside academia?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting space, and certainly a space we want to have, we want to contribute with the journal. It depends. It's difficult. It's not just a dissemination thing. What we have learned through conversation, external conversation, as well as internal conversation about, the science, the evidence-based policy, and how the science can help that kind of process, basically, is a number of things. And we can't tackle all of them because we are a scientific journal, but there are a few things we can do. we can certainly open our journals, or the ones that can, the interdisciplinary ones, to transdisciplinary research. So allowing, publishing research where there has been the co-design and the co-production with the policymakers or with the practitioners or with the NGO. And there are groups and a lot of universities now where these things are kind of happening.
So you're seeing end users as research participants and potentially co-authors?
That is what we mean by in transdisciplinary research. And there is an increasing consensus that is the best research to try and close that gap between science and policy.
Can you give me an example or two of where, I guess, an end user or a
so if, for example, NGOs, conservation NGOs are looking into lobbying for the government to preserve certain areas from aggressive land use change, because there might be a knock-on effect on biodiversity, they might want to kind of have a stronger case to go to their local authorities and say, hey, you can't really develop in this area the way you want to, because this is what is going to happen. But if they can do it with science and with economic analysis, with social analysis of what are the knock-on effects on the area, and provide us kind of evidence, then their kind of discussion goes to a different level. And that's why they're partnering with academia to try and produce that science. And that's just an example. In the water domain, there are some universities, for example, in the UK, but I'm sure this is happening elsewhere, and definitely happening here in Australia, where water is a big thing. They are, again, partnering with practitioners and even water utility companies, because they need to find better solution to deliver the drinking water to the families, minimize their costs, and they have to kind of find robust ways to do it. And what is the best way to do that? Well, then bring the science in. So what do we do that has the desired effect, and if we have to ask for support from the local authorities or to change regulations, how do we convince and sway local authorities to do things differently? Well, the best way is that kind of science. And so that science is produced together with them. So they design the research question. This is my problem. What can you tell me about this problem that can help me then persuade local authorities to do things differently?
So is that why the practitioners don't go it alone? Is it, what does academia offer? Is it credibility? Is it the expertise?
Robustness, credibility, but it's also kind of obviously a challenging space, because academia is usually a different cycle for producing robust evidence. And so there is now a movement into the space where there needs to be a fast-track research produced for those kind of fast turnaround of decision making. So it's a very interesting space to observe, actually.
That's one thing that I find kind of interesting, is that often business sector, they need to make decisions very rapidly, politicians fairly rapidly, but the time scales for research can be slower. Is that sort of changing as the partnerships form?
Yes, I'd say that's the only way. So in those kind of projects where they know they're doing something in parallel to their long lasting projects, they're trying to kind of find new ways or better ways to produce evidence fast enough. That's one thing. But then the other thing is that the ongoing projects that academic researchers are trying to produce, there are still of relevance to policymakers that do require longer, because interdisciplinary research requires more time, have also been suffering by lack of funding on the long run. And so that's also changing, because they're asking funders to understand the different needs of making interdisciplinary research. And so there is a sign now that they are adjusting to that need and giving funding that lasts a bit more for interdisciplinary work. So there are kind of two things happening there. Yeah, which are of interest.
Now, how many people in the room can, don't be shy or modest, can see yourselves publishing something in Nature Sustainability one day? Any hands up here? Oh, nice lot of hands. Oh, look, I think you're going to have a few questions over lunch. So look, let's get down to some nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Talk us through what is in a typical issue of Nature Sustainability. So, articles, reviews, perspectives. Talk us through those.
So the structure of the journal is pretty much typical of the last editions of interdisciplinary journals that are online. We have a front section where we publish opinion. So we have comment type articles that we tend to solicit from the community, from NGO leaders, from practitioners, and those are opinion pieces. They are occasionally peer-reviewed if they carry some analysis, but they don't need necessarily to be peer-reviewed, it depends. And then we have short news and views articles that are reflection on research papers written by experts. Then we can have some science journalism also in there. And then we do have a section of long articles, which are the reviews and the perspectives. So they share the same format, but reviews are what the name says, is a kind of critical synthesis of the literature, whereas perspectives take a little bit of a more personal angle on a topic, and where the authors can propose a new model or a new conceptual framework to address an issue that they have identified, that they want to put out for discussion and debate in the community. So that would be the new novel perspective.
I'm thinking evidence-based rant. Is it not quite that?
And then we have formats for primary research. So we have short formats for rapid response research that doesn't need a lot of space, and there might be quick updates or not very sophisticated experiments, short studies that they are delivering significant results and they don't need a lot of space. So we call them brief communications. We've introduced this format to try and avoid having too technical comments. We prefer, so they are as long as a comment, but we try to move, the more technical analysis-based kind of pieces into proper research rather than keeping them as comments just because they're short.
It's sounding very responsive to the space that it's feeding into. So that's not traditionally what journals do, is it? So in some ways?
No, that's true. We're trying to be kind of, usually there's a certain conservative approach. You maintain your brand through a standardized way of doing things. We're trying as much as we can in the company to be a little bit more responsive and creative. Yeah.
Sounds interesting. Now, you will get chances for questions and answers very soon, so start thinking about your questions. One thing that I wanted to ask about too was diversity and inclusion, because I imagine that, so you're based in the UK, is that right? And there's, that there is sort of a European English language in some ways, dominance of some kinds of literature, yet a lot of the really pressing sustainability issues that we're facing are especially felt by the global south. And then we're also, I think academia, particularly science, is also at the moment facing its Me Too moment as well, and we're having a lot of broad conversations about diversity, inclusion. Can you tell me a bit about how is that being thought of and addressed within, for example, the editorial review, reviewers for articles, or proactively seeking publication from the global south?
Yeah. So yes, that's a discussion we're having since the beginning. It's a broader discussion than my journal, so it's of interest to the whole Spring and Nature. We're having meetings discussing how well or how badly we're doing on diversity. For nature sustainability is very important, that inclusion. So we're trying to put a few things in place. There are challenges because obviously, for example, in selecting referees on an article, if an article is on a topic that requires the views and the expertise on the ground from people that are actually doing work in the Global South, we do seek actively referees that can respond to that. The challenge comes from the fact that, you know, the pool is not from which we can draw referees in the Global South. It's either not known because it's not the legacy, it's not the stuff that we do in nature, so we have to really dig a lot, or they're not necessarily that responsive, they might not have access to the journal. There are a number of challenges. We're not stopping because of those, but there are some trade-offs because obviously we can't keep searching for referees. We need to deliver a fast turnaround of peer review because that's what we promise to authors. So yeah, we're trying really our best to have those voices represented, as well as the gender balance, which I have to say we're doing pretty well. Compared to representing the voices from the Global South. We're finding it more difficult to have referees from the Global South, and definitely having authors from the Global South contributing. We've done a few things, so we have some examples of comments or perspectives where we do have authors that are from the Global South, but again, there is the challenge of those pieces, when they come from the Global South, require more work. And we, unfortunately, we are a small team. So we also have to kind of use wisely the time and be fair to all the authors that submit. So yeah, so I think we're going to get there eventually, but you know, it's going to take a bit of time.
And on gender, did I gather right that at least one
we
female reviewer?
We have a very good response from, you know, female scientists. We have a lot of female referees. We might not have the perfect solution, like every paper has at least a female referee, but the majority do get female referees. And we have been successful so far in attracting a lot of female authors. So of course we can do better. So this is part of, you know, what we're looking into. But I think we're gaining more rapidly there than on representing the Global South. That is a little bit more difficult.
Looking back on, so you've got, what, 6 issues, is that right, or 7 issues?
Yes,
published
7
to date?
issues.
7 issues.
7 issues.
This is like asking a parent, which of your children is your favourite child? I'll say, just pick out some highlights of articles that either have delighted you or fascinated you. Just give us a taste of the kind of things that have been published so far, and tell us, what was interesting about it and why it stands out to you.
Yeah, so we published a paper in, I think it was in issue 2, that has been widely picked and downloaded. Probably the one that has had the most also response on social media, which is Living the Good Life Within Planetary Boundaries. And I think that paper is really the cut of the journal, because it comes out of a long project of many years, so there was a lot of work from the authors. But beyond the robustness, it was just the message that really speaks to our audience. I was really pleased because I had colleagues in the company from other journals that are really not into sustainability reading it. And I think, like chemists, hard scientists, saying, oh, you published that paper, that just the title, I had to read it, because it is about us and how well we're doing and, what chances we have going on of living the good life. So that is a big highlight, and that's an interdisciplinary collaboration. Then there are other pieces. That is an interesting piece that I'm waiting to see, because we just published it, waiting to see how it will be received, which is exactly a call to the broad academic community to have a conversation about how do we step up the Global South in academia. That had an interesting background story as well. And then probably an opinion piece that is also has a very interesting background story that is coming up, that is on interdisciplinary research, where basically this background story that is interesting is that those authors, we put them together. They didn't know each other, and that's very unusual. We did it through a workshop that required a lot of effort on our side. And so the purpose of that workshop was to put together scientists from the most disparate background, like material science, oceanography, economics, earth science, but not just the disparate background and the geographic distribution, but the fact that they didn't know each other. We bring them together, we let them have a conversation about interdisciplinary science for global sustainability, and a chunk of them came up with a comment that is, again, is challenging the status quo in academia and why academia in general, with few exceptions, is not really equipped yet well to support interdisciplinary research. So yeah, there are interesting cases of papers where we have facilitated the discussion that I think is less usual. Yeah.
Oh, that would be, I must say, that would be fun. Research batch making. I wonder what would happen if I put you and you together.
Yeah.
That could be very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, do we have any questions from the audience? It's your turn if you want to put your hand up, and we've got a roving microphone that will come round. While everyone's being... Oh, no, we've got a hand over here.
Hi, good morning. My name's Tony Bevington from the School of Geography here at Melbourne. So that you know where this question's coming from, I'm an editor at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the Sustainability Sciences section. Mm-hmm. And so I'm interested to hear your view on how you would distinguish nature sustainability from the sustainability sciences part of PNAS.
Oh.
And then, related to that, if you were to advise authors as to how to choose where to submit between the two, what would your advice be?
Okay. Shall I respond to each one? Okay.
Yeah, good question.
So we see us very different from the sustainability science section at PNAS. It feels that they kind of embrace a certain view of what sustainability science is at PNAS. And there is nothing wrong with that, but it's obviously seeking a certain kind of quantitative kind of analysis with kind of a definition of sustainability in mind. And we've decided at Nature Sustainability to kind of be much more open to and respond to what the community from the different angles think, and the different fields and the different thoughts, school of thoughts, they think sustainability is. So we don't embrace any definition of sustainability science. We're just there for you to use the journal and have the conversation and the debate. And that means all of the communities, so the natural science community, the social science community, the engineering and technology community. And we felt that would be the added value of our journal, to allow you to define what you mean by sustainability and have those conversations. So you will see very different papers published in our journals, whereas it feels like there is a certain consistency in what you see published in the sustainability science of PNAS. You won't see the same in Nature Sustainability. In terms of advice, generally, obviously I cannot advise on which one to pick that are outside the family, because that wouldn't be very professional. I don't know the editors directly of the sustainability science section at PNAS, but general advice to authors in choosing a journal is look at and get a sense of what the readership of the journal is and what your readership, your targeted readership is for your article. Which is the community you want to get recognition from when you publish your article? Would that be represented by the journal? And of course, for a new journal, you might struggle to have a sense of what the readership is, and in which case you can get in touch with the editors and get a sense of that. But generally, for Nature Sustainability, it's a very global readership, and it's a readership that spans those kind of three main domains. So if that's what you want to have, an exposure to the natural, social, and engineering and technology domains on an issue that is relevant to sustainability, then definitely, and that is global, completely international, then definitely is the journal for you. If you're addressing a specific field, and that's where you want to get the recognition, or for example, you're writing a piece that is on climate change and you want really the recognition by the climate change community, then maybe you're better off in a journal that is focusing on that. So it's really about understanding your target audience and what the readership of the journal is, rather than looking at the scope. The scope can overlap a lot. So we might end up covering the same topics that go into sustainability, science, the section at PNAS, but we do it in a different way, and we have a different readership. So I hope that helps a bit. Yep.
I might push back on that a little bit because, and also to check that I understand it. You were saying that you don't have a set definition of sustainability, but my understanding is that to be in nature sustainability, the work has to have a component where you're looking at physical phenomena, but you're also looking at the human world as well. So it needs, if it's just physical world, then it's probably not suiting.
Yeah,
if
but,
just human,
but that's not a definition of the science.
Yeah.
So it's not deciding, how you define sustainability science. Is more a general approach to, wanting to look at the interconnection, which it does happen in the PNAS section. It's not that they don't do that. They look at the interaction human-natural, but they do it through a specific definition of the science. Yeah. And we just don't need to do that. We want to be open to, the community defining that kind of interaction, basically, on what grounds.
Now, there was a question over here somewhere. Yeah.
Hi, Rod Keenan. I'm from the School of Ecosystem and Forest Sciences here at the University of Melbourne. Mm-hmm. I've worked a lot with policymakers, practitioners through my career, and I guess the two big issues that they've had with scientific publishing, the first is access, getting the information, often sitting behind a paywall, particularly decision makers in developing countries. So whether the journal is going to try and do anything about that. And the second is when they do get access to a paper, it's often not in a format that actually helps them with decision making. It doesn't cover the breadth of the evidence that's available on a topic, doesn't present that evidence in a synthesis form, and it often won't really address the kind of challenges or the questions that the policymakers are asking. So what are you doing about those kinds of things?
Yeah, those are very, very good points. Thank you very much for asking. It's difficult. There is a long-lasting conversation within the publisher about this, and as editors, we've told the higher-up that we do need to kind of push those channels for access because we're not doing enough. But then the pushback is we're just a science publisher, right? So we're trying to work like not in a direct way, but try to find some contacts of scientists that are, like you say, close to the policymakers. Those are kind of not as effective, obviously. The perfect way would be to just send them free copies of all the articles, I know, but it's not yet a possibility at this stage. But working with those scientists who might have access through their institutions and that do work with and bring their contribution into the journal and then opening up the channel that way. Talking to them also, I've tried to do it when I was in Nature Climate Change in the UK. I tried to talk to some of the engagement groups in the Department of Energy and Climate Change. It's hard. You need to know someone that lets you in, and then you arranging meetings is difficult. So it's part of what we're trying to do, but we're still trying to figure out the best way to do it while kind of preserving our kind of sustainability as a journal. So yeah, definitely there is an issue of access, and the issue of format is also being discussed. So yeah, we can try and distill some of the articles in short, non-technical pieces that go in the journal, and we can try and publish those together. So that there is a technical article, that is a typical academic article, and then it goes with an 800 words short piece that is just kind of unpacking it. That is pretty successful as a way to do it, but again, we need to disseminate it to the right people, and yeah, it's work in progress.
Yeah, I'll second Brendan's comment before about the shameless, institution cross-promotion of Kathy Alexander's issues paper on outing the invisible academic. Yeah. She'd actually been a senior advisor to an MP, and did in that role had not had any approaches from scientists, researchers with evidence to present to decision makers. So you can always do that yourselves. I'm with another hat on. I'm on the exec committee of Science and Technology Australia, and I'm forever telling researchers that you're, especially scientists, you're scared of Parliament and these intimidating ministers and MPs, but they're just as scared of you as you are of them. Like I say to my kids with spiders and so on. So, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, I wanted just to add one thing that has emerged again from various conversations I've had, and there is definitely an element of what you're saying, but there is also very often lack of incentive. Scientists have a lot of things to do, and we seem to be asking more and more. Now we want them to engage with policymakers as well. They have to do robust research. They have to apply for funding. And so maybe they need support a little bit to try and engage with policymakers. And maybe if the incentive system in academia changed a bit and rewarded the work of scientists who actually do engage with practitioners, engage with NGOs, engage with policymakers, and rewarding it in a way that allows them to progress in their career, I'm sure they would have more of an incentive to do it. There is also a lack of that, I think.
I'm completely biased, but I thoroughly support that. There are, in the people that I see doing that community engagement on research, there are some who are supported by the institution, and it's actually part of their KPIs.
Yeah.
And often it's, especially where we have policymakers now who they want their support for research to be seen and visible in public. So if you're going out and talking about your research and as well as engaging with them, then that in some ways can be useful for attracting further grant funding for research. So it is very much changing. I think the era when you could rely on citations and that sort of thing purely as something that would get you further funding is possibly changing. So not that I'm an expert on such things, but that's from what I've heard from others. We've probably got time for one more question. Do we have another over here?
Yes. My concern is cost. I actually have just published with a student, a former PhD student, a book by Springer. I can't remember the cost of it, but it's terribly expensive. And I know you're dealing more with a journal than books, but periodicals or journals have become increasingly expensive. And that means that even some universities will not purchase them. And how do you deal with this? I mean, you're a business, you're into profit making, fair enough. But when things become so costly, it means that perhaps a whole lot of people, including people in the general public, don't have access to the journal. So I don't know how you grapple with those issues.
It's a very good question, actually. So then we all know that nature titles are expensive. I cannot talk about the books much because that's not exactly what I'm into. I'm more into journals. Nature titles are expensive. They are expensive for a reason, because we are professional editors, so that's our full-time job. And all of the work that goes into making those articles super shiny has a cost. It's also costly because we are selective, we publish few papers, and we're not an open access journal. I mean, the research journals are all subscription, and they're super selective, and publishing few papers that can't be open access. So yeah, so there are a lot of challenges for our business model, basically, to help the dissemination. It's not something that is not being discussed. It is being discussed, and there are some partial solutions that they're putting in place, like, you know, combining multiple journals together when they offer the subscriptions to universities, provided subscription with discount to universities in the Global South, but I know these are not the best solutions. Yeah, it's something that is probably for the company to reflect more on, which I know they're doing. We editors are kept quite in the dark about the commercial side of it because we have to stay neutral. So I don't think I can add much more to that at this stage. But we do have concerns about the dissemination, so that's not something we take lightly.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I'm kind of curious about is the conversation, because that's now, have you come across that? It's the online newspaper published by academics. I believe the conversation in the UK has started up now, and of course there's a little bit of hometown pride because it was started in Australia and in Melbourne particularly. But I imagine that, this is just me imagining, that the people within Springer Nature probably keep in touch with the editors at the conversation when there's a big paper coming out, because there would be a certain amount of dissemination to maybe policymakers, lay audience, people who don't necessarily need access to the full paper, but become aware of the research outcomes through those kind of channels.
There is also something to say, that's definitely what we are trying to kind of push a lot. So we know not all the research we publish in our journals will be relevant to policymakers, but there might be the one paper that is coming up and we want to push it through. So there are things we can do on the basis of individual article, definitely. And we have also a strong comms team that helps a lot to help with that. So there are things that we can do to try and push single pieces, individual articles. But there are also cases, that's the last thing I wanted to say, that we can raise within the company where we think that the kind of research we're publishing in a specific case has a very high societal value. It's, I don't know, it's a quantification, or it's a significant synthesis, or it's an analysis that, you know, we know has value beyond the community, is value for society, and we do build those cases for free dissemination in that case. Yeah. So we as editors are as proactive as we can to try and disseminate even beyond the paywall.
So every now and then a bit of, you know, free publication for public good. Oh, now the boss duty. We don't have time for one more question, but because it's you, Tony, then yeah, just last one before morning tea.
No, it's a very important point about dissemination. Sorry, I'm Tony Bouquet from Springer Nature. I just wanted to mention an initiative that the company started about 2 years ago called Shared It. And Shared It, if you are within a subscriber group, so if your university is a subscriber, or you are the author of a book or of a paper that participates in the Shared It initiative, when you open the paper in your computer, you will see the shared link. And clicking on that link, or the icon, sorry, the little share icon that we're all familiar with, will generate a URL that you can share with anybody, and is opened in what's called a ReadCube environment, which can be read on screen. It can't be printed out and it can't be further shared, but it can be shared with someone who doesn't have a subscription to the title. And so Shared It is a mechanism which is available for a journal like Nature Sustainability. And we also whitelist about 200 media outlets who, if they are quoting the paper, can also quote a link within their electronic article. and then that goes straight through to the journal, so without any paywall. So this is perhaps a very easy thing to do. I think Melbourne University, for example, has a subscription to Nature Sustainability. If you go there, I believe so, if you go there and you find the article, you click on the shared icon, you can share that with anyone throughout the world, and that doesn't cost them anything. And that link is persistent. So it doesn't change over time. So you can tweet the link, you can put it in an email, and perhaps that is part of the solution. And we've had more than 3 million articles shared in 2017. I don't know the numbers for this year. Quite a lot by the authors of those articles themselves, but also by people within the subscriber group. So I just suggest that. It's not that well known yet,
Yeah.
but please do try it.
Lucky we gave a last word to you, hey, Tony? Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Monica Contestabile.